And welcome into the State of Purple and the State of Purple podcast. He's Jack Day. I'm Aj Mansour, and this is KFAN's Minnesota Vikings podcast. Thanks to everyone who's joining us on the live stream today. It's a gloomy, Tuesday? I forgot what day it was. Gloomy Tuesday here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. We've got snow on the horizon, and Jack, the gloomy mood and the gloomy weather is fair enough because we kind of have a gloomy mood facing this football team right now.
Yeah, it's a weird one too, and I feel like I'm actually for the first time in my life, I'm on the calm side of this, which it's weird to say. Like my dad called me after the game actually, in more of a panic than myself. So it's going to be interesting talking about it, but I understand the concerns. There certainly are several pretty big concerns. I think that's pretty fair to say surrounding this team, and we saw this team kind of get exposed in, I don't even want to say ways that surprise us, because we've seen this team defensively get exposed now 5 consecutive games in a row.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. The theme of today's episode, we'll be breaking down, Jack, is whether or not the Minnesota Vikings, the 2022 Minnesota Vikings, are fraudulent. Are they a good football team? Do they deserve to be 10-3, or have they been, eking by the skin of their teeth each week? And we're going to break that down. It's going to have multiple facets to it, clearly. The national media has seemingly already made up their mind on this, that the Vikings are fraudulent. But we'll break it down a little bit and kind of give the local opinion and see what that means for us, the final 4 games of the season. And then as we prepare for what still will be a playoff run for this team. If it's not, it's a monumental breakdown, and we'll have a lot to talk about. But it will be a playoff run. So we'll discuss what that looks like and what this team looks like. But Jack, this last game, you have a loss to the Detroit Lions. It was a road game. We talked last week about how it was kind of strange that the Lions, given the fact that they were 5-7 and the Vikings were 10-2, were the favorites, 2.5-point favorites, and they end up winning the game by what ended up being 11 points, 34-23. Monumental breakdown on defense. Maybe that's where we start. There's a lot of fingers to point and weird decisions that were made throughout the game that were kind of out of character for many people. But at the end of the day, this game was lost because of the defense. That's fair to say?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there was a couple like flukier, I don't even know if we should say flukier mistakes. I think you can point at Kevin O'Connell with some of them. I don't know if this loss is necessarily 100% on Kevin O'Connell, but that goal line handoff jump pass attempt to, I think it would have been Johnny Munt. And yeah. I want to start, he's getting a lot of criticism for that, but if that play converts, everyone's praising him about how much of a wizard he is in the red zone with scheming guys open. So I will say that, but I think it was a first or second down too. It wasn't a critical
goal
point.
From the 3.
Yeah, and the fumble was just disgusting. At that point, if Delvin Cook is going to dance around like that, just get your head down and try to get as many yards as you can, because it's not worth losing the football in that situation. But again, I think you have to point the fingers at the defensive side of the ball. That's the obvious one. I know they were without some of their star players, without Harrison Smith, and I think you can point at some of those coverage breakdowns that maybe they don't happen with him there. Maybe they do. This defense had him the previous 4 weeks, and they were still allowing 400-plus yards a game. So it wasn't – I don't think Harrison Smith necessarily makes or breaks this game for the Vikings. And I will say that 11-point game – so I just heard something. I don't know if it's just getting windy out here in Minnesota now or what, but I don't think Harrison Smith makes or breaks that game in any way. And now I lost my train of thought because I'm hearing this weird noise, but
no, it might have been my kid too. He's digging through the snack drawer and slamming cupboards in the kitchen, so that might have been it too. Yeah, so I mean, there's plenty to it, and I do want to talk on those coaching decisions. But before I want to do that, I want to make sure we mention our sponsor. Today's show sponsor, as it is always, making this happen, is SodaStick and SodaStick.com. You can head over to SodaStick.com right now and enter the promo code KFAN, where you can save 15% on your Minnesota sports-inspired goods. And Jack, get this. There's still time. If you order now, between now and Thursday, this coming Thursday at midnight, Thursday would be what? December 15th at midnight, you will still get your order before Christmas. That's their guarantee. Anything after that, you're kind of playing with fire. But You can order your Minnesota sports inspired goods. I've got my Minnesota Cheers State hat on right now. There's some new colorways of this hat that's available. There's the t-shirts, the ones we're featuring in the stream right now, the Randy Moss, Bud Grant, John Randall, Adam Thielen. There's lots of shirts, again, Minnesota sports inspired. So maybe you have a Twins fan or another sport there. But right here, we're featuring the Vikings. So sodastick.com, you can enter the promo code KFAN and save 15% on your Christmas order now. Guaranteed shipping before Christmas if you order before Thursday at midnight. So thank you to SodaStick for sponsoring the State of Purple podcast. I want to take that step one step further, Jack, this criticism of these coaching decisions. I think the criticism comes more so not because they were bad decisions. Again, the logic and the analytics, and if you break down all these things, many of them were the right decision based on the situational gameplay. What felt weird was that it was so out of character for Kevin O'Connell. He's a new age coach compared to Mike Zimmer, but we haven't seen a lot of these situations. The go for it on fourth down in your own territory, the trick play at the goal line, the early onside kick, the timeout situation. All of those situations kind of came at once, right? So it felt weird. It felt like maybe he was trying to get out of character or completely change his MO mid-season, which is totally fine. But that's where you're going to get the criticism when they don't work out. Now, I think situationally, maybe, while I agree with some of the situations and the decisions that he made, situationally, understanding that in this particular game, you're without two of your starting offensive linemen, you're without some safety help over the top with Harrison Smith out, that's where I think that I start to question it and say, okay, the Johnny Munt, Dalvin Cook trick play, jump pass situation on 1st and goal, I don't mind that play call. But when you have an offensive line that's struggling and you have two offensive linemen starters that are out, may not be the best position to do it in a scenario where they're going to get some penetration up the middle. And that's what made Dalvin trip out. That made him freak out a little bit. He kind of was going between pass and run, and the ball was not protected, and it got stripped and fumbled. Same for that 4th and 1 situation early in the game in your own territory. Don't hate the 4th and 1 call. Despise the shotgun run to Dalvin Cook behind your backup center. That was the decision there that I just didn't make sense. Sneak it, run it to the outside, power run, do the things that this team does well. Shotgun run is not one of them.
Yeah, it almost gave me a little bit of flashbacks of a DiFilippo-led offense, honestly. It just some of the situations were just weird. And going back to that Dalvin fumble, that's where I was going before I got a little sidetracked. The 11-point game, it's not an 11-point game if they punch it in the end zone there. It's a complete different ball game. And I think the biggest frustration for me defensively for this team, it's not even necessarily the big plays, because the big plays are going to happen, especially when at this point it's very safe to say the Vikings are a bottom half defense. I think they actually, I thought I saw something that had them ranked dead last, which might have just been in terms of yards. But the thing that frustrates me the most, yes, big plays are going to happen, but when are these big plays happening against this defense? It almost always feels like it's 3rd and 12 or 3rd and 8. Your defense does everything right, everything that it's supposed to do to get the opposing offense in a 3rd and long situation. And then it's like they forgot how to play defense when they get in that situation. It's just, It's insane. I have it written down in my notes. I don't even have to look down because I remember writing it down. It didn't matter who Jared Goff was throwing to on Sunday. They were more than likely open. It just seemed like people were getting open. There were busted coverages everywhere. And the lack of pressure is not helping the secondary anyway. I know that Zadarius Smith leads the league in pressures, but it just feels weird. They're both putting up pressure numbers, but it doesn't feel like they're getting to the quarterback enough, at least to the point where they're in the opposing team's quarterback's head. Because you heard Kirk Cousins talk about it a week or two ago when they were playing the Jets. He was uncomfortable because of the amount of pressure they were throwing at him in different areas of the field. And the Vikings, quite frankly, just have not had the ability to do that outside of a couple good games from Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter. And that is kind of what makes the defense go, in my opinion. You need to have solidified, really good top-end pass rushers, especially when you have a younger, I don't even know what you want to call this secondary anymore, because it's kind of a melting pot of talent with young guys that are now on the IR, Patrick Peterson and Harrison Smith, 2 potential Hall of Fame veterans. But the defense is a mess. And I want to finish this thought by saying I don't think the right answer necessarily, I know there's a lot of people calling for Ed Donatello's head. I don't think that's the answer yet, because then it's a fresh start. I think the options would be like Mike Pettin, a defensive coordinator who Vikings fans are pretty familiar with when he was coaching the Green Bay Packers. And I know there's a lot of Packers fans that didn't really like him as a D coordinator either. So I don't think the options in-house are great right now. And if they make that change, schematically speaking, they might have to change things up again, which then we're back to square one. And I don't think that's the case I don't think that's the best situation for a team that is still, I know they lost to the Detroit Lions, which I think that, I don't know. I had different beliefs going into the season about this Detroit Lions team. I know they went through a little bit of a funk, but I always thought this was potentially the second or third best team in the division. And they're the hottest team in football right now. So I don't think this is a loss that Vikings fans should look at like, oh my God, they lost to the Detroit Lions. This isn't the 0-16 Detroit Lions anymore. This is a very good coached Detroit Lions team with a lot of up and coming talent on that roster.
Yeah, that's hard to argue with. I mean, it is what it is, and what is clear though, Jack, is something needs to change, right? You need the fans need to take a breath and get everybody healthy, and then see, get us back to where it was. It was not great, but it was better than it has been the last handful of weeks when you're super thin at cornerback. Obviously, Harrison Smith out this week. Zadarius Smith is injured to some extent. He's limping off and on the field every single game. If you can give him some rest this weekend, that might not be a terrible thing. If they can get up early and then pull him out of the game at halftime or something, take some reps off of them there. You can't completely change the defense midseason. I mean, you just can't. Whether the fans want it or not, they want to go back to 3-4, all these things. Long-term wise, the switch to the 3-4, we always talked about this, is going to take more than one season. They don't have the personnel to perfectly run a 3-4. You can't do that and turn it over in one season, especially when you're draft the pick players you drafted to fit into this defense. I think 3 of the first 4 are injured, and you don't have them on the field. You can say what you want about their impact prior to their injuries, but they were rookies. They're still getting used to this too, and coming into this. So when you try and shape this defense into something brand new, you bring in free agents like Zadarius Smith. That's worked out okay. You bring in new draft picks that can fit this defense, and we just haven't had that on the field. So I don't know that the right answer is switch from the 3-4, but you need to switch something, whether it's you're just changing the way that you're covering. Adam Thielen mentioned something last week about what the Lions do so well. And what they do that gets teams off, and it just makes sense when you think about it. I don't know why every team doesn't do it. Maybe they're not able to do it. Is they bring pressure to the quarterback. They blitz the quarterback at the same time as they do press coverage. So, you have how do you beat the blitz, right? You get the ball out of the quarterback's hand quickly, right? A slant, whatever. But when you have press coverage and all of your cornerbacks are up on the wide receivers, when you bring pressure and you get the pressure in the backfield and make the quarterback make a quick decision, you're throwing to wide receivers that have somebody right on them. Maybe they haven't even gotten off the line yet. And they just pair that up really well. That's the kind of just thinking, however obvious that might sound, that we need to do better. This team just needs to do better. They can't, whatever they're doing now isn't working. So schematically, tactically, you just need to adjust something, because you're not going to be able to revamp the whole thing. So stop calling for Donatell's head. Stop calling for the switch back to the 3-4. This team's defense was terrible when it was 4-3 last year too. We're not saying that the scheme is the fault here. They don't have the right players. They have a lot of injuries. That is what it is, and we just have to deal with it right now. And that's part of this fraudulent nature, the potential that this team could be frauds.
A question for you then, because I think when you look at Detroit, philosophies are different. I think Kevin O'Connell came in and took over a more hostile culture, which we don't need to get into, but he was the entire offseason, they were preaching collaboration and culture. We've said, I don't even know how many, I don't want to know how many times I've said those words on this show, but Dan Campbell is now in year 2, and their motto throughout Hard Knocks is grit. They are a gritty team. They're a lot more of a, I'm going to punch you in the mouth team than what the Minnesota Vikings are. They have a defensive coordinator over there that's willing to come up and press guys on the line and send some pressure. The Vikings have the worst pressure rate in the NFL. And quite frankly, it doesn't look like Ed Donatel, as good as Patrick Peterson has been. He doesn't trust Patrick Peterson and Cameron Dancer to go up and play press coverage, because either he doesn't trust them, or that's just completely out the window in terms of schematically speaking for this defense. But What do you think that is? Because if Ed Donato could kind of make that switch and maybe play some more press coverage, I don't know if it's a lack of talent or if it's just kind of instilled in his brain that this is how he needs to operate this defense.
Well, I think that I think you can look at the Lions scenario and highlight why it might not work out for the Vikings. You don't have the ability to get pressure on the quarterback that the Lions seemingly do, that the Jets did, that the Redskins did when they played them. Whether it's your front three, your front five, whatever you want to call it, on a 4-3, a 3-4, excuse me. If you don't have that ability to put pressure on the quarterback can just sit back there. And if you don't have dynamic press coverage cornerbacks or cornerbacks that are in their prime, maybe that's a better way to say it for a guy like Patrick Peterson, who had the ability to do that, but maybe he's even a half step slow. All right, he's a veteran guy. He's been a lot of miles on those legs. If he's a half step slow, if the rookie cornerbacks, the young cornerbacks, don't have the ability to the skills yet to stick with a receiver for a longer route on press coverage, and you can't put pressure on the quarterback, then the quarterback just sits back there and picks you apart. If you can pair those two together, that's the ideal scenario. Bring the blitz coverage and tough press coverage, and the confidence to get pressure on the quarterback, I guess, might be the flaw for this defense. They don't blitz a lot. Their normal pass rush doesn't put a ton of pressure on the quarterback, and even when they do blitz, they don't get pressure on the quarterback. Did they have 0 sacks this last week?
The Vikings, I believe so. I have the box.
I think that's right. I mean, they got no sacks on Jared Goff, who is not mobile.
Yeah.
On the Lions, who have a good offensive line, but it's not like best in the league, right? I mean, it's not. We're not talking about the Detroit Lions offensive line left and right. So that's part of the struggle. There is you just can't. You're giving these quarterbacks time to throw, and then you have a coach in Dan Campbell who schemed this thing perfectly. Right, we already talked about the defensive schemes, but you talk about the offensive schemes too, and the problems that this Vikings defense has on third downs, on being susceptible to big plays when on short yardage, and then you just throw in some goofball, brain-headed mistakes. That first touchdown to Jamison Williams, the long touchdowns that they had later on to Reynolds. I mean, you have these situations where when your team needs to get off the field on third down, the Lions, I think they finished just under 50%, but their confidence level was like 100%. Every third down, we're going to get this first down. And that is because the Vikings defense has proven they just can't get off the field on third down.
Yeah, and it just seems, and this might go back to the word grit, but it just seems like the Detroit Lions team, especially if we're just going to put a microscope on just this game, it looked like they were the team with more swag. They looked like they were the team more prepared, better coached. I mean, they had a 43-yard fourth, and I don't even know how long that fourth down was where they ran that fake punt, but it was like a 43-yard run, and that's something that can't happen. And
right.
Props to Dan Campbell and his staff, because they're the team that is willing to do this. Like I said this Sunday morning when we talked on this show, and they had everything to lose with this game. And it just felt like the Vikings going into this game, they knew that they could almost use this as a game where they can compete with this team, but also use it as like an extra bye week for some of these players. If this was a playoff game, I don't know how right I am in saying this, but I would have guessed that Harrison Smith would be out there. I would have guessed that Bradbury. I don't know how significant the injuries were, but I know Darisaw cleared concussion protocol, and they just kind of wanted to get another week of practice under his belt before he returns. And
right.
It just felt like a team, like a Vikings team that was going in there. And I don't want to say expecting the old Lions, because Kevin O'Connell has given all the props in the world to that front office over there. And I'm going to sit here and do the same thing, because I said at the beginning of the season, and I'm saying it still now. I think this Detroit Lions team is going to be the real deal here in the next couple seasons. We saw Aiden Hutchinson, their number 2 overall pick. I thought he had 2 sacks, but the box score says that he only had 1. So they're going to be a pain in the Vikings side for many years to come. And I'm hoping that it's Dan Campbell against Kevin O'Connell for many years to come, because one, that means Kevin O'Connell has continued to do something right, but it's a fun matchup, and I really like the way that Dan Campbell coaches his team.
Right. I think we got a little wooed too, right? Kevin O'Connell comes in and he goes 10-2, right? First year head coach running away with a great first season. We forget that he's still a first year head coach, right? So some of these mistakes he's These are some of the things we saw from Zimmer in game 1, maybe, but now we're seeing them from O'Connell in game 13, and that is what it is. That's okay. He's has enough equity built up, changing the culture, changing the tone in the locker room. The players seem to love him. Enough equity built up to maybe make one bad game, push it aside. We talked about this after that Dallas game, though. You cannot let this build upon itself. And you have a winnable game against the Colts this Saturday where you need to, get right again. Get out there, make a statement, and prove to everybody that you are a good team. Maybe you're not as good as a 10-2 record or a number 2 seed in the NFC, whatever, but you're still a good team. And you have the ability to go out there and make some hay. So we'll see that. What's bummer this last weekend, Jack, is the wasted amazing performance from Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson. Jefferson goes out and sets the franchise record for receiving yards in a game. Kirk Cousins throws for more than 400 yards, maybe his best game of the season. I don't want to say it was wasted, but when you have that happen and you end up with the loss, it feels wasted.
It feels wasted, but it also feels like it's something we've been looking for, a performance like this not for Justin Jefferson. This is almost expected. I was looking at it, all of a sudden he's above 200 yards, and I was like, okay, that doesn't even seem surprising. I think he averaged over 20 yards a catch, which is just absurd as well. But we've been looking for a game where we can point to a Kirk Cousins game this season and be like, this is the Kirk Cousins that we're used to seeing, where he was lights out. He was delivering great throws. I said it on Sunday as well. I kind of expected him to have a game like this because he always plays really, really good against the Detroit Lions, and that continued. It's unfortunate that the defense had to let him down. The special teams had to let him down, but this is a game where I think you can look at it, and Kevin O'Connell can look at it, and I think they can learn some things from this game still. I don't necessarily want to sit up here and say the defense is going to get better, but it can't get much worse than what we've seen over the last 5 games. And if Kirk Cousins and Kevin O'Connell can find a way to build off this, I think we're going to see the strongest version of Kirk Cousins moving forward down the stretch, which is by far the most critical time for the quarterback to really click and kind of get used to. I don't want to say get used to, because he's been getting used to this offense all season, but even he was always saying after every single win that they had, I wasn't perfect. I need to be better. He was damn near perfect. There's not a lot more that he can do than he did against Detroit, and I think he's going to continue that stretch moving forward.
Yeah, and you keep mentioning a couple times now the last 5 games. That stat or that thought comes from the fact that they've allowed 400+ yards of offense to the opposition for the last 5 games. Not great. Doesn't help the team.
The most frustrating part about that stat is you look at who they play, and that's Mac Jones, Mike White, and now Jared Goff. Like, those are not 3 quarterbacks that probably should be doing that. They're not doing that to other defenses around the league. So it has to get buttoned up. And talking to all the Vikings fans out there, I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, but I think it's going to get somewhat better. And I don't know if better means they're going to cut down on the big plays and the yardage that they're giving up, or if it's just going to continue to be kind of what we were used to seeing this year, where that's going to continue. But hey, they're going to at least find ways to force turnovers to kind of flip the script. And quite frankly, Detroit, they were the only team in this one to really have those true, like, flip the script, momentum building style plays with the Delvin fumble at the goal line and then the fake punt as well. So you can't get beaten the turnover margin. You can't get beaten with trick plays either and expect to win games, and you lose both of those battles. And that's what happened to, I'm going to say it again, that's what happened on Sunday to a very good Detroit Lions football team.
One more note on Justin Jefferson before we get to our question of the day and talk about whether the Vikings are actually fraudulent or actually a good team. Justin Jefferson is 465 yards away from passing Calvin Johnson's single-season record. He currently leads the league with 1,500 yards, 40 yards ahead of Tyreek Hill right now. Jack, that puts him on an average of 116, just over 116.25 yards per game. You look at the remaining schedule, you have Giants, Colts, Bears, and Packers. Seems pretty doable. Is that how you're feeling?
Yeah, that's not the number I'm looking at. I'm looking at 125 yards because he wants to get to 2,000 yards. That was the goal that he had. And also, I'm not going to blame this loss on officiating because that is not the case, but the NFL has got to do something to stop they're blowing some very obvious things that shouldn't be happening. And you took a touchdown away from Justin Jefferson on Sunday, which
Right.
I think he tweeted something about it as well that was just
He
kind of
did,
having some fun with it. But again, the ref was right there. I don't know how you don't at least let the play go through the end and then review it if you do think he was out of bounds. But hey,
yeah. It
I'm not
feels
getting
like
paid that salary, so
they just need an exception there, right? Because they have this idea for fumbles where they kind of let the play roll out, right? And then they'll go back and review it and see if they need to do it. But in that situation, I don't blame the ref for if he thought that he stepped out, you have to blow your whistle and call the play dead. But there has to be an exception there to say, okay, we can review this because right now, isn't it? They call the play dead, then it's done. Like there's no review. How do you review that? But when there's no impeding force between Justin and the end zone at that point in time, right? So very clear. Had he not pulled a muscle, torn an ACL, he would have scored the touchdown there. There wasn't any line he had to beat yet. He would have scored that touchdown. You need to be able to review that play. You need to give a team the opportunity to review that play and say, okay, you know what? He didn't step out and there was a touchdown. It wouldn't have dynamically changed the game, but it would have put points on the board earlier, given the Vikings some more time. They eventually scored on that drive, but it still would have given them more time, and it could have changed the way that the timeouts were used, the game clock management towards the end. It does change that pretty drastically. So they
put it this way. What if that happened in January of 2018? I think the Vikings fans wouldn't have a very special Stephon Diggs moment that
it looked eerily similar to that,
it was very similar, where he was just right on the edge. And yeah, if the ref calls Diggs out of bounds there, I don't know. This entire state might riot. We might not have a football team anymore at this point.
Minneapolis massacre. Yeah, it would have been very different. All right, Jack, let's get to the talking point of the day. We've mentioned a bunch of factors about the Vikings loss this last week, have been the things that the national football scene has been harping on with the Minnesota Vikings all season long. Minnesota Vikings, 10-3, the number 2 seed right now in the NFC, number 1 in the NFC North. Are they fraudulent? Are they actually a good football team, or have they been the benefactors of luck? And we talk about the close wins, the one-score wins, the big plays at the end on offense or defense. Are they a fraudulent football team? And I guess the way that we weigh that is, are they good enough to win a game in the playoffs?
I'm gonna say yes to that. And I'm gonna say no to them being fraudulent. I don't think this is a fraudulent football team. I've said this from the beginning of the season. I thought that this would be somewhere 9, 10, 11 win team, and that's where they are, way out ahead of kind of what I thought they were going to be. And quite frankly, they've impressed me this year. I know you can look at all the analytics, you can look at the differential and all that stuff, but that stuff, it really isn't super important to me. This team is still 10-3. They're still finding ways to win football games, and it's not easy to do that in the National Football League. I know that's a cliche saying. Everyone kind of says that, but I think the NFC and quite frankly the NFL altogether is still pretty wide open. Now, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to lie to you and say I think the Vikings are in that same category as probably like the Philadelphia Eagles, Dallas, and I don't know what to make of San Francisco right now with the Brock Purdy momentum that he's creating over there. But I don't know if I'm going to say the Vikings are necessarily Super Bowl contenders, and I don't think that was ever necessarily the case. I said this could be a good football team, a good playoff football team that could potentially surprise some people. Anything can happen when you get in the playoffs, and I think they're more than capable of getting a home playoff game and maybe winning a game or two. Like I said, I don't think it's a Super Bowl winning team. I don't think that's fair to expect out of a first-year head coach and Kevin O'Connell. But sitting here right now, I really can't find anything bad to say about Kevin O'Connell and this new regime. I know there's been some ups and downs already, but at the end of the day, like I've said this already, they're 10-3. They're in line to have an at-home playoff game for their first playoff game this year. So I think the Vikings are a legitimate team. I think when you talk about fraudulent, I think that's because maybe the national media compares them to teams like Patrick Mahomes or the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. And quite frankly, I don't want to hear that conversation. I don't want to imagine what Patrick Mahomes and company could do to this Minnesota Vikings defense quite yet. So I don't think they're fraudulent. I think they are a very good football team that just isn't quite great quite yet. And I think that they're going to get there. I still feel really confident about the coaching staff and the front office hirings that we saw this last offseason. And I'm really excited to see a playoff run with them and then kind of reassessing and getting in the next year mode. I've already started doing mock drafts. I'll admit that. I haven't posted any yet because I know that pisses people off. It pisses people off when I do them in February, March, let alone when I'm sitting here doing them in December. But I'm excited to see. I still have faith in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell, and I think that this Vikings franchise is in good hands for the foreseeable future.
Right. I think you did a great job of kind of setting the expectation when we talk about fraud or not fraud. The expectation for the team that is going to win the division, they're not frauds. This is not a great division, first off. So you're winning some games there. They've won some big games along the way. So I give them the opportunity to potentially win a playoff game. Keep it close enough to have those one plays down the stretch like they have 9 times this season to keep a game close and come out on top and with the victory there. They opened the season, Jack, at plus 4,000 for Super Bowl odds, presently at plus 1,500. So their odds have been up. And like you mentioned, at the beginning of the season, nobody was talking about the Minnesota Vikings.
They hit the over already, too.
Winning the Super Bowl, right. I mean, all these things, they're having a better season than we thought. So the expectation, and we tended to have this shift in Minnesota when we have a team that has some good situations, we go straight to Super Bowl or NBA championship or NBA finals, whatever. And we have to prove it, right? These teams have to prove it and have some equity built up there. You're not going to be able to, do the 91 Twins situation from worst to first every time you have an opportunity to do so. So I think they can win a playoff game. I think they can win a playoff game against even Dallas. I think they can win a playoff game against the San Francisco 49ers, depending on who they line up against. I think they can beat those teams. It might be, 3 out of 5 times they lose that game, but there are still two times that they can win at, 4 out of 10, whatever you want to look, however you want to look at it. I think that they're good enough to compete. And that is what you need to do to, get yourself into the playoffs and give yourself a chance each week to go out there and have it. Clearly, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Raymond just put this in the chat. Lots of work needs to be done. They need to get healthy and add more pieces into the future. Nobody's arguing that. That's a perfect analysis. This is a team that has potential. This is a team that needs to change. This is a team that needs to get better. And that happens when you go from a first-year head coach, first-year GM, new schemes, new things like that. That big shift happens in the second offseason, right? Your first class of drafts and free agents has a year under their belt and a year of veteran, of experience in the NFL where they can get better and understand what you're asking of them. And then you have a second class that you can bring in, a second class of free agents, maybe some more money to spend. There's this big Justin Jefferson contract thing that might impinge on that, but and then you have another draft class to bring in as well. So you have 2 times the amount of players to help your team, 2 times the amount of experience to change things and get continue stepping in the right direction. So if you look at this season, even if they were to lose the rest of the games, which I don't think they're going to, a 10-7 season, I think that's an okay season for a first-year head coach, first-year GM, lots of changes, and then you look to get better on that. Odds are they're going to finish, 12-5, 13-4, more so. You have that opportunity there too. So this is great. I don't think they're fraudulent. I don't think you just have to manage your expectations. I think you hit it on the head there.
Yeah, and I wanted to take that one step further even because, again, going back to all the fun stuff that we got to listen to prior to football being actually played by this team, the words competitive rebuild were thrown out there by the new GM. I don't think that and granted, yes, if the Vikings win a Super Bowl this year, that's the best possible outcome you can have with a competitive rebuild. But having said that, the Vikings are doing exactly what they said they were going to do. They are competing while they're still, I mean, they don't have a ton of draft picks. They're going to get a couple more. I think they should have at least 1 or 2 comp picks as well added in next year. But it's going to be another weird year where a lot of Vikings fans are talking about, well, what about that 2022 draft class? And quite frankly, they're getting a first round safety level talent back at the beginning of next year, healthy, a first round talent, I'll say, at cornerback. I know we didn't really see that out of Andrew Booth, a player that they love in a Caleb Evans out at cornerback too. The secondary has been depleted, but they have 2 very high ceiling type players at the cornerback position that is going to have a year of NFL processing under their belts. They love Brian Asamoah, Ed Ingram. We haven't had to talk a lot about Ed Ingram in the last couple games. He's played better, which is kind of what you want to see out of a rookie that gets thrown in the fire too early. And I think they're nailing this competitive rebuild. And I just wanted to say that. And then talking about people throwing the fraudulent word out at the Vikings, I think a lot of those, it seems weird, a lot of those seem to be coming across this state line that I live right next to, which is really odd, because it's weird that someone can call a team fraudulent when you have a top 5 defense, a top 5 running back, a Hall of Fame quarterback, and it's weird that they're not being called frauds at all, because they're not in the race for the NFC North. But we'll save that battle for another day.
Always got to get the shot across the bow. That's Jack Day. Nice. All right, Jack, we will be back later this week with another episode to preview this Saturday's game against the Colts. But that's that. The Vikings' fraudulent abilities.
Must win? Are you going to call this a must win with the talent level that is coming into Minneapolis?
Yeah, I think just because of the team you're facing, and to switch the momentum, just get people off your back a little bit, both in state and out of state. It's a very important win, if not a must win. But thanks to Soda Stick. Again, you can get your Christmas orders in still through Thursday at midnight. Use that promo code KFAN to take 15% off Minnesota sports inspired goods at SodaStick and sodastick.com. This is the State of Purple. It's KFAN's Minnesota Vikings podcast. If you want to find old episodes of the State of Purple podcast, head over to iHeartRadio. Make sure you subscribe. It's on iTunes, wherever you get your favorite podcast, but make sure you subscribe so you can get them delivered straight to your inbox every time there's a new episode, and you can find old episodes as well. All right, Jack, we will talk later this week. I think we're shooting for Thursday to have another conversation with the early week and the early schedule previewing the Colts game. So we'll see you later.
Take a little walk to the edge of town and go across the